Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day. There's a lot of news, some fresh, hot off the press, but we'll discuss that in the second segment. We will start though with we haven't really been discussing Donald Trump's legal troubles lately, but a lot of news has happened just over the past week. So far, four people have entered plea deals out of the 19 co-defendants in the Georgia case filed by Fani Willis. Three of them attorneys. Of course, they are Powell, Chesbrough, and Ellis, they were significant attorneys. They've all basically, in their plea agreement, agreed that they lied about the election being stolen, they are going to, in return for telling the truth when they're called to trial, they got, I think, like a $5,000 fine, a couple years, I think 5 years of probation, which actually is significant, and they each have agreed to write letters of apology to the voters of Georgia. There's this, and then news yesterday is Mark Meadows has apparently made a deal for immunity in the federal case by Jack Smith, and has already testified. Last night, he put something out saying that he didn't get immunity for doing it. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but the media is uniformly reporting that no, in fact, he did take an immunity deal. Not a lot of comments from Trump about these people. He did say that he doesn't think Mark Meadows did that Mark Meadows probably wouldn't do that, but if he did, it's because of the gangster, Jack Smith or whatever, shaking him down. But these are all people who are going to testify, who've admitted that they conspired. Even though they're not being charged ultimately with the RICO, they are going to testify as to their involvement in these things. And these were three key attorneys, probably the only attorneys and people more significant than these three would be like Eastman or Giuliani. Who knows what Giuliani's going to do? Apparently, he's out of money. Trump isn't paying for everybody's attorneys this time around. But Trump is very careful about what he's saying about people because I think he really doesn't want to get them angry. And Powell, apparently, as of this morning, is coming back around to saying, "Oh no, the election was stolen," and then putting an article on it, not saying it herself, but posting an article on her social media saying that it was a shakedown from the prosecution. So is this going to violate the terms of the plea deal? I don't know, but we don't really know exactly how this is going to impact the case against everyone else, especially Donald Trump. But it's not something he clearly wanted to see happen. There are certainly no words of triumph coming from either Trump or his attorneys. But these are significant developments. I don't think Trump is ever going to offer a plea deal. I can't see how that's going to play out. So, Dave, how is this going to play out?
Yeah, this is all pretty interesting. It's moving quicker than it was for a while. We're seeing, like you said, these plea deals in sequence. So that's 14. That's 4 out of the group of original co-defendants that have pled guilty. I think big picture, this gives prosecution access to the people who were part of the plot and part of the execution, and Trump's sort of inner circle of legal and PR folks. So it's consistent with how a RICO racketeering case usually plays out, where lower level people roll over, they take plea deals, and then that way they could be used to pressure higher ups. So I think
let's point out that both Chesbrough and Powell were set to go to trial next week, or this week maybe, and when their motions failed, they just caved right away. So it's just they called for speedy trial and maybe are regretting it now. I don't know.
Yeah, so you actually reminded me of one of the key points I wanted to say, which is, and I have to attribute it to our colleague Aaron Donaldson, not to misquote him, but he basically said something to the effect of nothing like the potential for jail time to sharpen one's mind about how best to respond to charges of this nature. That's a little more formal than the way he said it, but that I want to give him credit because that's really where we're at here. Is that these people, they were in their capacity as sort of employees and supporters, maybe both in philosophy and ideology, but also they were getting paid. But now that they saw the writing on the wall, things changed. And so there's a quote from a former federal prosecutor that I saw. I think it was in the Hill, reported in the Hill, Chris Mattei. And he said, he said, the real import of the plea is the signal it sends to the other defendants. Number one, that your time is running out for you to cooperate, because as cooperators come in and plead guilty, the prosecution continues to build its case and may not have the need to cooperate with other individuals. So basically, what if you read between the lines, 3 lawyers, people who are acutely aware of the costs of continuing to perpetuate the status quo. They realized the consequences on them personally and professionally. So,
and on that note, if you ever you can find memes and all of it that have all 19 mugshots. If you take a close look, it does seem, at least to me, in that the lawyers in the crowd look more worried than the others.
The mugshot uncomfort comes through, maybe in the image captured. Yeah. They accepted, these charges. Powell was only guilty to misdemeanor charges, but Chesborough and Ellis had a felony also in addition to other charges. Yes. So the felony count for Ellis, for example, was aiding and abetting false statements and writings.
Probably geared towards what she said about the 2 women, about the 2 African-American women, because that caused real damage. And that's probably why they insisted on a felony.
Yeah, exactly. And so separately, you also mentioned Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, the appearance that he was given immunity. I heard a lot of different news sources say, well, ABC reported this and we haven't been able to corroborate it. But they did document that he'd gone in, Meadows, to speak with, under oath 3 times. So there's I think the importance of that, because that's the federal case.
Sure.
But that it's been well written and sort of reported that they are mutually supportive cases. So, for example, if somebody goes into a deposition and says, I'm pleading guilty to, if like Ellis, for example, she pled guilty to aiding and abetting false statements and writings. Well, that implies that there were false statements and writings. So there's the factual evidence crossover from where Mark Meadows sits as the chief of staff. He was sitting next to Trump in many of the conversations that were documented by the January 6th committee. He had a front row seat in terms of, he was like the hub of the hub and spoke arrangement of the wheel that people talk about. And in the context of a RICO statute, that's a very dangerous seat to be in. So we'll see. I mean, I have a little bit more, the idea that it's less likely you're going to get enticing plea deals from other people like Trump, like Giuliani, like Eastman, like Jeffrey Clark. Those people may not, facing 13 charges, Trump and Giuliani, for example, he's not likely to get any plea deals necessarily, these folks. One last name, David Schaefer. He's the former head of the Georgia Republican Party. He's another one that maybe Fani Willis would not be so inclined to give a plea deal to, unless under more extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah, they'll probably offer one to Kanye's former publicist, whatever her name is, I'm forgotten already, and to some of the others, and maybe the fake electors. But I don't know if they'll offer them to all the fake electors, because she didn't name all of them, which tells me that the others have probably already agreed to participate. How many fake electors do they need? Maybe she needs the convictions more than she needs the their cooperation at this point. So they're in a jam, but this is starting to happen. This is, this is kind of what it's an analogous to what started to happen with Nixon when all of a sudden people started fingering each other and falling down. But they're going to, I notice that Trump is keeping it mellow, not attacking them just yet. Because maybe he's hoping that they'll be willing to perjure themselves on the stand for him, if they believe that they can't be caught or whatever. And Powell's, all of a sudden, and who knows how many death threats these people are receiving too. That might also account for Powell's, flip-flopping back and forth. But there's also suggestions that she's under the pressure, actually starting to suffer some dementia. So, who knows what is coherent there, but her attorneys better get a handle on her real quickly, because if these latest posts are a violation of the plea agreement, then Fannie gets everything. They get to go after her, and they probably already got her statements that they're going to use against her. So she better play this very carefully. But unfortunately, these people aren't known for playing things very carefully, it's just they have a sense of entitlement, and their sense of entitlement is so strong it affects their perceptions of reality, and that's why they're in this mess. Meadows, obviously, in the federal election interference case, so far there are no co-defendants. So they're probably keeping that open. He's taking a different strategy than Fannie Willis, who just basically, anybody who she hadn't already made a deal with, she just went ahead and charged them all. Again, and the reason I believe the ABC report is Jack Smith. I've never seen this much control. Stuff that gets leaked, it's leaked because he wants it leaked, and maybe he just wanted to send it to ABC connection or whatever. But I don't believe this was a random leak, and maybe they want to trip Mark Meadows up. I don't know. I would not want to be in their position. I mean, this is real hard. And as you say, the four big shots left, you named them all. Trump, of course, and Clark, and Giuliani, and Eastman, who was the architect of the whole thing. The whole thing being lame, but still, it was an attempt. He did draw up plans to overturn an election, and it's just how this will play out politically, I don't know, but they've got legal problems, they again, I don't know all the details about all the case against all the others, but I do expect that as we get closer to any kind of trial, more of them will start folding.
So I know we only have a couple of minutes left, but one element that I think, your experience as a lawyer, maybe you could shine a little light on this or insight. Eastman's lawyer, Harvey Silvergate, went on the record in response to some of these recent revelations of plea deals. He said that the prosecutors are going to have a real hard time getting a dozen jurors, quote, to convict anybody, because I think in any jurisdiction, even in Washington, D.C., you will have at least one holdout, end quote. So they're, at least the story they're telling themselves about their likelihood of success in the courtroom, they're basically saying, well, you know what, if we do go to trial, maybe there'll be one of us in there, and Willis won't get the conviction that she's looking for. Any feedback on that?
I don't. First of all, I think people have been watching too many movies. This isn't, 12 Angry Men. This is a reality. And when they're presented with the evidence, it becomes overwhelming. And it is actually very difficult for one person to hold out, no matter how much they are. And Fannie Willis will just, and the others will just have to be, Jack Smith will have to be very careful with jury selection. And make sure that they've fleshed that out. But it's not true that there's always somebody. That's a myth. It's quite frankly, unless if there's going to be a mistrial, it's going to be more like 7-5 or something like that. I don't see it. But like I said, people watch movies. They watch All in the Family, where they said, where the media was reporting a lone holdout, and Archie says lone holdout. They should have said lone dingbat. That was when Edith was on the jury and she was playing the part of Henry Fonda. Anyway, it was just it does happen, but I think that they're trying to create a story out of nothing.
We went through a lot to get here, but we are ready to govern, and that will begin right away. You've all heard me talk a lot today, and I'm not going to belabor the point because the sun is bright and it's too warm for the fall. But I'll say this. We're going to dispense with all the usual ceremonies and celebrations that traditionally follow a new speakership because we have no time for either one. The American people's business is too urgent in this moment. The hour is late, the crisis is great. In America, we hear you. And we are reporting again, as I said in there, to our duty stations. That will begin in just a few moments. This entire group is going to go back to the House floor, and we are going to pass our resolution in support of the nation of Israel, our closest ally in the Middle East. You're going to see an aggressive schedule in the days and weeks ahead. You're going to see Congress working as hard as it's ever worked, and we are going to deliver for the American people. I'm grateful for this opportunity. I want to thank you for being patient with us, and I promise you it'll be worth it.
Okay, we first were planning out this topic. We were going to talk about the ongoing dysfunction, and there still is dysfunction. Don't get me wrong, but they have the Republicans have finally rallied around a new House Speaker. It is Representative Mike Johnson from Louisiana. Maybe not quite as crazy as Jim Jordan, but still an election denier. And don't say gay bill advocate, all kinds of things. He is, I don't even want to say very conservative. When you're an election denier, that's not conservative. That's not showing respect for the institutions. That's has nothing to do with Edmund Burke style, conservatism, as presented in sort of modern times through people like William Buckley, who at least were quasi-intellectual and I'm convinced would be a never-Trumper to this date. And the rest, but I think the Republicans found themselves in a tough spot. The dysfunction is happening. The moderate Republicans who are worried about getting reelected in competitive districts, I think about 20 of them actually leaning blue districts, really have had to worry about this. And they probably had to make a calculus. Okay, maybe Mike Johnson, who nobody knows, is going to be less controversial than Jim Jordan. And maybe they can avoid a government shutdown, which at this point, everybody is going to blame on the Republicans. A lot of times, Republicans shut it down, but the public and voters say, oh, it's just dysfunction in general. It's both parties' fault. But the way this is played out, I think they're going to have a very hard time selling that, even as far away as a year from now. So I think that they've chosen somebody that the moderates didn't like, but the moderates probably also realized they weren't going to get who they want. So this is a form of a compromise, but it is a compromise that leaves the Republicans in trouble and possibly the country if we do have a government shutdown. But how the voters are going to handle that. We'll see, but it seems to me that the swing voters who went for Biden in 2020 will probably not be impressed with the Republicans in this. They're in a jam, and we'll see what they can do. But you've got an emergency in the Middle East that they want to blame on Biden somehow, and so they got to get a unified voice to be able to do that. And you've got the ongoing Ukraine situation, and going to be arguments over funding for that. And then you've got, the Freedom Caucus. That this is still them in power, and so we'll see if this improves the dysfunction at all. I doubt it. I think that they've got a speaker finally, and that puts a bandage over some blood, but coming out, but they're still bleeding. Because because Trump is basically in control. Didn't get his preferred candidate, but got basically a Trumper.
Yeah, literally a Trumper. And I think that there's some interesting sidebars or parallel details that kind of help explain or at least clarify the moment here. Like I said last time we spoke, it does not reflect well that their former, actually, I think the current majority leader in the House, Steve Scalise, was not Trump friendly enough and got rejected, and that
Right.
Jim Jordan was a little too much in lots of ways for moderates to go along. They didn't see eye to eye. Last time we talked, Jim Jordan was only getting a little bit more than half of their caucus, and it was going down each time because of the threats that he and his supporters were making to moderates and their families. So there's an extreme side of this that played out over this past weekend. And as you said, when you proposed this topic, there was about a dozen potential, maybe 9, I think was the number, potential people who threw their hat in the ring. One of those included Kevin Hern from Oklahoma, who was the chair of the Republican Study Committee. And, you and I have covered this before. That group is the one that wants to, limit the budget to 2022 spending levels over the next decade, potentially cutting up to, $3.7 trillion. There's not much that avoids the axe under their vision. Well, this replacement, the new speaker, he is a former chair of that group, and he's on their executive committee. So I guess he rose through this process, supported by the Freedom Caucus, supported by Matt Gaetz and those folks who did bring down Speaker McCarthy. So when this did go to a vote, it was a vote. It was on party lines. So it ended up 220 to 209 with just one Republican not present, which effectively is unanimous for his party, which at least for them that's a sign of some course correction. And some solidarity in air quotes. The fact that he is, Mike Johnson, vice chair of the House Republican Conference, the GOP deputy whip, so he did have some stature. He did have some recognition and support across the across the party.
He also did at the last minute get Trump's endorsement.
That's where I was going with this. Yeah, exactly. I'll let you comment on that. But the idea that as of, just yesterday, Tom Emmer, who was the whip, the ally of McCarthy, he got the most votes in conference. But then, while Trump was on break in his trial in New York, he was able to get the message out that Emmer was not sufficiently pro-Trump. That he called him. His message on Truth Social, quote, called him a globalist rhino. And then his communications team shared that out across all GOP members. And within just a few hours, Emmer was forced to step aside. As the whip, he knew the votes weren't there. So those people that are like, I think it's called the Gaetz 8. I'm not sure what McCarthy exactly calls them, but the more extreme members of their caucus, they are lockstep, or at least taking the pulse of the room. And when Trump speaks, they're responding, and the rest of the party followed that lead. And when Mike Johnson got his support today, he got the vote soon thereafter.
Yeah. Now, his rhetoric is not as wild as some of the others, but he is definitely on record as an election denier. And I think he's one of the people who doesn't actually believe it, but says it because it's politically he has to, or he'll get primaried. In his district. But this is the problem that they're going to have, is he will get reelected, no problem, next year. Jim Jordan will get elected, no problem, because they've got districts that are stacked in their favor. But now all of the moderate Republicans, I think even the one who was not present, I don't know who that was, but all of the people in those swing districts have got a problem, because the Democrats who are planning to run are already writing their ads. Trump's vote that one of the things they want to say is this is Trump's party. Trump owns everybody in the party, including my opponent, because he voted. Trump spoke, and they all voted for him, right? They were probably planning to do it, and then if anything, that Trump endorsement jeopardized their votes. But they probably just decided to go forward with it because they had to weigh what is the worst damage going on to be dysfunctional, in which case there's no reason to vote for them, or just getting somebody in there who's not quite as insane as the others. We mentioned the 9 people. Of those 9, 7 of them were election deniers, at least publicly. What they private, there's that old line from Spartacus where the liberal senator, is like going to bought some birds to sacrifice, and his colleague says, "Do you believe in all that? Do you believe in the gods?" And he says, "Privately, I believe in none of the gods. Publicly, I believe in all of them." That's they're in this situation, but it's and they're going to have to be really careful as to how they respond to this, because their Democrats are already writing up Trump barked and they jumped, and they voted for an election denier. So it doesn't matter that you're not an election denier personally. You voted to put one in office, and that's just insane. And the Democrats are, if they're running effective campaigns, are probably going to hit them hard on that over and over and over again. And the Republican Party has got their committees going. The committee that they've got headed by Comer, just tripped over themselves again by saying that they had a check that was written to Biden from somebody that represented it, and then it turned out that was a loan check payment or something like that. And so all of a sudden the Republicans are saying, well, we don't see any evidence of that loan. And it's like, well, maybe because it's none of your business. This is private dealings within the family. And at any rate, and I think most people are going to see that. I don't think that's gaining any traction for him. Online, you see MAGA people saying over and over and over again, well, the way the election was stolen was because the press buried the laptop story. And it's like, the press didn't. They were skeptical. But I remember hearing about it ad nauseum right through the election thing on mainstream media. It's just that they were more skeptical than some of the others. And later it turned out to be that it was probably the legitimate thing, although it wasn't quite a laptop. It was a drive. And there's some big differences in that. And Hunter Biden is now filing a lawsuit against some of those people for their misrepresentations and for stealing the data. And so it's like, and how this is going to play out, I don't think most of the American public is excited about the Hunter Biden story. It's kind of like the Russian meddling was for liberals. All the liberals got really excited and thought this was a big deal. Swing voters, it wasn't a big deal to them. Maybe they're just so numbed to the craziness that they just don't see that anymore. They're more worried about inflation and what you're going to do about it. And what is this new guy going to say about inflation other than it's Biden's fault? And what is he going to do to deal with it? He's not, because the Republican line is that if they can tank the economy, it'll look bad for Biden. But I don't know if that's going to play true this time around. We'll see. Yes, Trump is doing well in the polls, but if you look at those polls closely, against Biden, you'll see 39% to 40%, and that leaves about 20% undecided. Those undecided voters last time in 2020 went to Biden, because if you're a swing voter, you're probably going to not end up voting for Trump, even if you're not really happy with Biden enough to say that you support him. So those polls, which they seem to look good for Trump, really aren't good for Trump. The only ones I would worry about are the ones that have very few undecided voters and show it close. But I don't trust those polls. So so at any rate, this is a problem politically. Practically speaking, are they going to get anything done? I don't know. It's just and even if they manage to pass something, the Democrats still have the Senate. So what are they planning to do? Just put stuff up and not expect to do it? Jim Jordan, by the way, his whole time in Congress has never had a bill be converted into law, not once. And he's been in there a while. So it's just, that's somebody who doesn't see it as his job to govern, or doesn't or just doesn't care, or is thoroughly incompetent and can't write a bill.
There's the Jim Jordan sort of critique that you spelled out, but then there's the question of the pivoting back to the entirety of the caucus here. So the new speaker, like, what does this new speaker represent, and where are they headed in this? One of the reasons that Emmer didn't actually get support of the of the rest of his colleagues is because because he supported, or at least a few of them say, that he supported federal legislation protecting same-sex marriage. But you and I know that it was primarily because he wasn't sufficiently, he didn't vote to overturn President Trump's election loss. So these are some of the boxes that have to be checked here in terms of, like, from the Republican perspective, what are they looking for? Well, Mike Johnson, he's supporting a national abortion ban, or at least on the surface. That's what he's claiming. I have no reason to think otherwise, that maybe he truly thinks that that's where the party is, and their base and their ideology, etc. He also proposed a national ban on mentioning gender in schools that are attended by children under 10 years old. And I think that was actually legislation. So they are going, you and I have talked before about sometimes the actions of a Jordan or people like that are out there being engaging in demagoguery, arguably. I call it team building. They are a less generous viewing of it could be posturing or political theater, knowing that they can't get things through the Senate, like you mentioned, Eric. But overall, if you look at the types of things that Mike Johnson supports, the types of things that got the unanimity of the caucus, I think you could point to, maybe he was just gloating, but today already, Matt Gaetz is out. I think he was on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast. And the quote from him that I saw circulated was, "If you don't think that moving from Kevin McCarthy to MAGA Mike Johnson shows the ascendance of this movement and where the power in the Republican Party truly lies, then you're not paying attention," end quote. So from the inside perspective, that's what, to them, that's what Mike Johnson represents. That's what they're, kind of rallying around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, I don't know, how much further to go on this, but we've got a lot happening right now in terms of the money and the conflation of, what they're calling the conflation of the monetary that might force Republicans to vote for this. There is a lot of intense opposition in the Republican Party to aid to Ukraine, which again is going to be used by Democrats to show that basically they're tools of Putin. Hasn't worked before, but they, if they word it right, it's going to have a real effect. Biden has already proposed a bill for $100 billion spending that includes Ukrainian Israel aid and money to the border, to militarize it or whatever. I don't know where the money is supposed to be allocated. They've got a lot of work to be done, and nothing really has gotten done over the past few weeks. So they've got a lot of catching up to do if the interest is in governing. But again, you have a number of Republicans in there that don't have an interest in governing. They don't see that as their job.
So you mentioned Jordan, and his 16 plus years not sponsoring anything that became law. We talked about how it seems like there's a lot of obstruction. There's a lot of blocking. There's a lot of shutting down the government and sort of it being in their interest. The Republican study group wanting to cut. So the question is, also, Johnson, he's out on the record of saying he's against aid to Ukraine. So he represents that faction, or at least he's a member of that faction. They are, the fact that they're interested in sort of make America great, stay home, less international and global engagement, less compromise. I think that, the key thing here is we have this government shutdown pending. We have this sort of supplemental that is, a continuing resolution that needs to, according to a bipartisan consensus, that sort of needs to be passed. But it's possible that this was the holdout position of those Freedom Caucus folks to have someone in their corner who was going to draw the line at Ukraine and sort of blow the consensus apart in the name of keeping things more in alignment with that core group of make America great, spend money here, don't be part of a escalation of a global plan to continue Cold War, etc. Confronting Putin where he stands, that they focus more closely on at home. So we'll see how it plays out.
We will see that, and I will have a prediction at the end of the show about this dysfunction, but we need to move on to the next topic.
Let's understand what the precipitating event here was that's causing the current crisis. And that was an ever-escalating number of missiles that were landing not just in Israeli territory, but in areas that are populated. And there's no country on earth that would tolerate missiles raining down on its citizens from outside its borders. So we are fully supportive of Israel's right to defend itself from missiles landing on people's homes and workplaces and potentially killing civilians. And we will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself.
Okay, we've all seen the horrible news happening in the Middle East, starting with what I refer to as a pogrom committed by Hamas against Israeli citizens, the largest since World War II, and then has resulted in ongoing war, a lot of rockets being fired into Israel, and a lot of bombing by Israel in at least the northern part of Hamas. A number of Hamas leaders have been killed, but by some reports, the civilian casualties are over 5,000 now. That's in Gaza. That's more than the 2014 and the 2018 conflicts combined. Again, we seem to have this every 5 to 10 years. I think we're at a cycle of now every 5 years or so. We went 6 for this one, I guess. No, 5. Sorry, 2018. So this is going on. This is an emergency. And yet we've got people, this isn't even House dysfunction now. This is what senators, Republican senators, blocking appointments to the military and over, wokeness or whatever it is that they want to call. And they're blocking trying to block the appointment of an ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew in particular. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has, in fact, voted 12-9 to advance the nomination of Jack Lew. They got Manchin's support here, and Manchin's support yesterday. Manchin was hemming and hawing. He, of course, is in a very tough, if not impossible, re-election attempt himself. But the Republicans have wanted to deny him the nomination, deny him the appointment on the basis of his involvement with a nuclear deal with Iran when he served in the Obama administration, which they view as a failure. But, it's kind of interesting because part of the reason it's failing is because Trump, when he was president, unilaterally pulled out of it, and so this is an ongoing discussion. But 12-9, I think means he had to have had a couple of Republicans supporting him, which probably looks good for his appointment. But
I think just Rand Paul. What I saw was that it was just Rand Paul.
Okay, all right, and so I guess numerically that would make sense. Somebody maybe wasn't present, and I would what I would say is that we don't have. It's really bad that we don't have an ambassador to Israel right now at this time when we need one the most. I mean, basically, our Secretary of State has basically been filling in that role, but Blinken, we need somebody to get over there who's knowledgeable to really try to help work through this stuff, because there's been a lot going on. And we can talk about issues with other countries, a lot of ambiguity around a hospital, who blew it up. I'm sure it was an accident by either side. I don't think that either side had anything politically to gain by blowing up the hospital, but it happened, and 500 people possibly died in that one event alone. It's basically it kept Biden from going to Jordan, because Jordan canceled the meeting over that. A lot going on here, and yet the partisan politics still are making it difficult to get anything done, and based on a completely irrational and unrelated matter. Is that they don't like the nuclear deal because Trump pulled out of it. Yet, I'm sorry, but I think that this is once again dysfunction, Trump sourced.
So much of the blocking, I think, has been attributed to, like you said, other issues. So it doesn't appear to be the case that there's anything disqualifying about former Treasury Secretary Liu. It literally is to make a statement is one thing, but in reality, there's something bigger going on. So you mentioned Tuberville. It's a peripheral issue, but it's poignant. It's telling that he's holding up over 300 military promotions because he doesn't like that the Pentagon funds abortion access, out-of-state abortion access, which is a legal thing. And quite honestly, it's a little bit more than grandstanding. He says it's out of principle, but it has an impact. It creates issues. So, for example, the Pentagon did brief senators recently that said 9 of those positions are they're in the command responsible for the Middle East. And so to have 9 top senior military officer commissions held up over, a domestic dispute over a process that is legal and is, to a certain extent, not that controversial, that you're going to provide, a human resource benefit to soldiers and their families. That's relatively standard across our country. It can be seen as extreme. But pivoting back to this issue of the actual ambassador to Israel, it's a larger problem. So it's been reported in Foreign Affairs and elsewhere that at the time of the attack in Israel, the United States does not have a confirmed ambassador in Israel or Egypt or Oman or Kuwait. Now, Israel and Egypt are obviously critical, but if you look at, I looked at the map, we have about 50,000 troops across maybe about 8 or 10 countries in the region, and that includes Kuwait, that includes Oman, it includes other people involved in the peace process right now to release hostages like Qatar and Egypt, of course.
And not to mention the warships we've also sent to the area and the ones that were there to begin with too.
Yeah, and like we have, I forget the number, the fleet designation, but one of our carrier groups is based in Qatar in the region, and so they've actually been activated too for Persian Gulf protection, and there's a whole, besides those 2 carrier groups, there's just a whole grip of escalation going on right now, and we really need diplomacy. We really need peace. You and I aren't going to adjudicate this in an 8-minute session here, but there are other State Department officials, like the counterterrorism seat was empty for a couple years. The top human rights envoy, let's see, the title is the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights and Labor. It was unfilled because of partisanship.
All that on Tuberville. Ted Cruz has also been irrationally blocking diplomatic appointments for his pet issues. They have one. And
yeah. And I saw Rand Paul's name was on the list, and J.D. Vance's name was on the list. Maybe the fact that Rand Paul did actually vote to advance Liu means that he was given some promise, or at least he no longer has the same reservations that he did about access to COVID documentation, which is, of course, a very separate issue here. There was a quote from Senator Chris Murphy. He said, and he's the leading Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said, quote, "This is an all hands on deck moment in history, and the administration needs a Senate confirmed American diplomat present in every capital in the region as soon as possible." It's a very common sense statement. I don't think there are too many justifications for not having a diplomatic corps in place, a full diplomatic corps. So yeah, Jack Liu, like I said, that one criticism of supporting the Iran nuclear deal, the idea that we would have engage in a peaceful overture to them. You know, there's a time for confrontation, and there's a time to try to advance peace. And it was time to try to advance peace with them. It turns out that you know, separately from that, the more recent deal with releasing funds for in exchange for hostages, that the money that was Iran's in South Korea, that actually had conditionality associated with it, so much so that none of it actually was ever released. I see more of that grandstanding. But, you know, again, if rather than assume the worst, assume that maybe folks don't want peace, that they don't now. And so at this contentious time, that's when we need the diplomacy of the State Department even more. If there are members of Congress who are belligerent, like Lindsey Graham, talking about, you know, how the awful things, we don't even have to give them credence, escalation to what would amount to a regional war, out of sort of a reactionary position, that we need leadership above and beyond those reactionary responses.
I mean, you know, again, we're past a time. There was a time when it was taboo in Washington politics, anyways, to attack the leader of your country in a time of military crisis. I mean, everybody dumped on Carter, for instance, when the rescue mission of the Iranian hostages failed. You know, nobody ever really explained how it was his fault. It was just did not go well. But they did attack him, but they didn't attack him that day. I think there were maybe 2 people who attacked him, including then independent candidate John Anderson, and they got swiftly put down. This is not the time. You support the president, whoever the president is, until such a time. You can criticize him for his performance later, but this is not the time. We don't have that sense of governing anymore. They all want to portray themselves as outsiders. Even people like Ted Cruz has been in there forever. So it's just, you know, and they want to, as railing against the deep state. This is the problem. Again, this is why I attribute this to Trump and the crisis of it and the inability to deal with the situation, because we don't have having a diplomat that is designated for that purpose is really important. Present at the embassy in Israel, and the fact that it hasn't happened, and that Republicans are trying to oppose this. There's no time to try to research and vet another one. They need to have it in there now. So Republicans should be saying, well, I have my reservations, but we need to get somebody in there. That's what governing is. If governing is your situation, this is once again a problem of dysfunction, and it is Trump origin, because you know, he's got his own lines, and they can't stand up to him, because if they do, they'll get primaried. And for some of them, that's a threat. And for other Republicans, that's a big deal, because if they get primaried, those candidates are going to have a hard time winning in the general, if they have any chance. So, you know, but with Trump, the Republicans are in this, you can't live with them, you can't live without them, because not only do they not want to be primaried, but they also need MAGA voters to turn out. And some of them said if Trump isn't on the ballot next year, they're not going to turn out.
So one of the things you mentioned when we proposed this topic for this week was that, you know, in addition to the issue with ambassadors in the region and leadership and diplomacy, right. There's a really it's really contentious conversations within Republican circles, and also separately within Democratic circles, about how to handle this crisis. So this can and will boil over into domestic politics, most certainly. And we had Obama come out recently with some words of, I guess, you know, wisdom from his perspective. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
He just basically said that there needs to be push for restraint on both sides. Biden has been in a tough spot where he did not want to do it. He didn't even want to call for a ceasefire because it just seemed insensitive to the Israelis. I think now that we're getting over 5,000 Gazan casualties, there are going to be more calls for ceasefire. I don't know that Obama's necessarily coming out against Biden. It may be that he's just, as a statesman, calling for it in a situation where Biden can't. because it's different to say something in an official capacity as opposed to your opinion as an elder statesman. And so I'm not seeing him specifically criticizing Biden. It's just that his line is a little bit different. There needs to be a ceasefire, and both sides need to chill out. And that's not a popular sentiment. So I'll let you.
Yeah. So just to kind of bring these two together, the State Department, this is widely reported that they sent out through the diplomat corps not to engage in conversations about a ceasefire and not to entertain the idea of really talking about what comes next, in part because, again, widely reported, Israeli leadership has said that they don't have a plan for what comes next. They know that they don't want to work with Hamas, and that they want to have a military operation against them, and then that's their vision. But the rest of the world is boiling. Capitals and cities around the world, Europe, Middle East, it's global. And also other authoritarian leaders are seeing it as a sign of weakness that the U.S. is kind of doing some kind of self-inflicted wound by being a little bit tone deaf to the Arab Street and even other progressive voices around the world. So for our State Department to be in a position to say, look, we're not going to talk about this right now. Obama, I think, is starting to. What he did, in effect, was he's allowed people who have a lot of angst and worse, that if this is going to escalate to a regional war, that hey, look, we can lower the boiling point if we just embrace the concept of the plight of the Palestinian people. And again, this is a much longer, broader story, but we'll certainly be picking up on it more in the future.
I agree. Again, I don't. Well, but we'll have more to say about it. But we are at the point where I think there will be more calls for a ceasefire. The UN guy cannot make the mistake he made on Tuesday, but we'll talk about that next week.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany. The spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
This brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
I'm picking up on this theme of internal State Department and internal congressional staffing, folks who are beginning to either quit, resign, or make public statements of support for Palestinian people. That I think the what's called the Overton window is starting to move. That in effect the crisis that we see now is forcing the hand of statesmen and leaders in our country to articulate things that have been sort of taboo because they're so challenging. And my prediction is that, for example, Bernie Sanders, 300 former staff members, progressive Democrats mostly, but progressives outside the Democratic Party in many cases now out of disillusionment, that these people will in fact be able to escalate the conversation to a level that is not so contentious. And following up on that, we probably will see some statement from Bernie Sanders that is a effective articulation of the demand for talks about what comes next for a peaceful partner in the region.
I also think that once Lou is appointed, that is going to formulate, and I agree. All right, I'll be real quick here. I believe that the government is going to be shut down. I don't know for how long, but I just don't believe that the Republicans are functional enough to do it. The Freedom Caucus has to send their message or whatever. The government is going to shut down. It's going to cause some pain and irritation, and I think as the Republican moderates have calculated, it's going to hurt Republicans. And so I don't think it'll be shut down for very long, because I think that their Republicans will threaten to break off in private, and support the Democrats in reinstating the government. But we'll see what happens. But that's my prediction. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.